Uh, I really want to thank you for yesterday. I read carefully through all of your chats, and you did a beautiful summary of what we did yesterday, looking at explicit instruction. And again, today, our motto that we're going to carry through is based on the big ideas from yesterday about how well you teach equals how well they learn. And so we were polishing up our practices because how well they learn equals how well we teach. Now, we did look at 13 elements, and we're going to do retrieval practice because I want to continue to emphasize how critical retrieval practice is to learning. So we're going to continue with active participation. Thank you for participating. And so today we use some of the same practices, particularly I would love you to have paper in front of you. I have mine all set to go, my yellow tablet, and to write down best practices, because you're giving this effort to our shared career, all with the intention to add to our professional expertise. So writing down what you think were the best practices that you wanted to implement. And we will sometimes have short core responses, and some of the really important research that was done on opportunities to respond found that if the responses were overt, not just thinking about it, but saying something, reading something out loud, making gestures, writing something down, the more overt the responses, the more the students learned. So if you are in a private room and I ask a question and it's a short answer where we all have the same answer, just shout it right out wherever you are, to remind us that good responses are overt. And sometimes I'll ask you to read something with me, particularly when we do our next two sessions after this review. One is looking at what we know from research we need to do with older students, fourth grade above, who are struggling readers. And then we're going to look at writing, particularly writing sentences, and how we might incorporate that into our teaching. And so you might be reading with me, or I might read stop and you're going to say the next word. And sometimes we might hold up fingers, even though I can't see them, to show an answer. And most importantly, today we'll have you writing in the chat box. Once again, at the end, you're going to write down your takeaways, partly for I can see, that idea I must have stressed, and so it became a takeaway. Questions that you have, go into the chat box, and Michelle is going to, at times when I stop and ask, are there any questions, she will share those with me. So in other words, yes, we are participating on this beautiful June 9th. Now, yesterday, these were the 13 elements that we looked at. And I'm going to give you a moment to study up on them. And then we will do a 2-minute retrieval without the prompt there. So think to yourself. So we had content, and the content should be critical. Teach this stuff and cut the fluff. And we need to break it down into obtainable pieces. And then we had the design of the lesson, that it was organized and focused. We would tell the students the purpose or the goal. And then we'd have review that was interactive, but also with retrieval practice. And if we were teaching a strategy, how to do something, we would have the steps of I do and follow the cursor, we do and you do. Though this might be over time if it was very complex, what we were teaching. And we looked at the end of the day on delivery, where we would get frequent responses from the students. We would carefully look and listen. We'd monitor their performance and give feedback that was affirmative feedback, praise, as well as informative. Here's how you could improve your performance, as well as corrective. And we'd have a brisk pace. And boy, do we have to have a brisk pace today because what Michelle and I planned is a lot. And that we would also have practice and have judicious practice. So on your piece of paper to start, before we do the timing, I want you to write down content and leave some space and design and delivery and practice. So one of the critical ideas that came up on the takeaways from yesterday was the emphasis on, if I want students to learn something, they have to rehearse it. So I'm going to give you a chance to rehearse this. And then if I really want to move it from working memory to permanent memory, then retrieval practice would help that a great deal. So I want you to take a few minutes to study these, then I'm going to black it out and we'll do our 2-minute retrieval. So silent study. All right. And getting ready. 2 minutes, and you don't have to write out, just put down enough to recall it. And getting ready and begin. All right, so looking back at this, because retrieval practice always must be followed with feedback. So check yours out. All right, So we're going to look at this really in action today in two different areas, working with struggling students in terms of reading, struggling students in terms of writing. My hope is that you will have definite takeaways today that will make a difference. But we do have a lot to cover. We were thinking about all of the background knowledge that people had and that we could cover quite a bit. And so let me just pull up our PowerPoint for today. You're very patient with my technological skills. Okay, and Michelle, do you see that?
Yes, I do. Ready to go with reading interventions.
All right. And so when Michelle and I talked about the content that we would cover, I suggested that one of the most important documents that emerged recently was the IES practice guide called Providing Reading Interventions for Students in Grades 4 through 9. And the IES is the Institute of Educational Sciences, a part of our federal government. And what they do, and you're probably aware of this already, is that they get an annual issue that they're looking at. And sometimes more than one, but usually one. And then they have a group of researchers that collect the studies that have been done on that question. And from the review of those documents and research studies, they come up with recommendations that are heavily research supported. And I really, if you work with this population or you're at a school site that has older struggling readers, this is a must-read document. And you have access to it as you got all of the links. You can also, on those links, you'll find that there was not only the document, but there was also a webinar given about 2 months ago on it that was done by Sharon Vaughn at University of Texas, Austin, and Kim St. Martin, who leads a literacy group in the state of Michigan. And what they did was present the information here, but I wanted to do it where we had more examples for you, but you can watch that video also, given your links. So looking at this, let me just get rid of that. Okay, there is what the document looks like. And I have laid it out here so I can refer to parts of it as we look at it. Now, my goals of this webinar are multifold. One, I find that many people are not familiar with the IES practice guides. And I highly recommend that you Google today IES practice guides. And here's what you're going to find: a whole list of practice guides that have been done in the past. And they are all summaries of research on certain issues and recommendations in wonderful form. They're really useful for, like, if you have professional learning time at your school site, they can be downloaded and reproduced for people to read. So maybe you want to find more about what is the research on foundational skills in reading, targeted at kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. There's a IES practice guide. Maybe you are an algebra teacher, and what is the research on teaching algebra so that students are more likely to get the concepts? There's a practice guide. Or writing for primary students or intermediate students or secondary students, or content area instruction, adolescent study skills. It's just a wealth of free information that has been done very, very well. So I want you to get excited about IES practice guides. And then what we're going to do today is have a little book study on one of them, the newest IES practice guide on interventions for older struggling readers. Now, some of you may know that most of my career has been dedicated to studying that area, from my dissertation on and writing curriculum materials. So I have to give you a full disclosure, because I want you to know that I have written curriculum in this area, but also the studies that were done on rewards really from agencies outside of the team that wrote it was part of what informed this IS practice guide. So these are the curriculum materials that I've written with Dr. Mary Gleason. Rewards Intermediate, which teaches how to read complex words, multisyllabic words, and a version of it for secondary intervention. And then interventions that apply all of that, utilizing social studies passages or science passages. We just as well learn knowledge as we're getting to be better readers. And a program that is for 4th grade and above, that's a different publisher called Phonics Reading that some of you are familiar with. All right, well, let us see what the recommendations were for in the practice guide. So we are thinking about students that are in 4th grade and above that still don't read accurately and fluently at the 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, and beyond levels. So what would research inform us in terms of what we should do? So the first one was that we should teach them decoding skills so that they would be able to read unfamiliar, complex, multisyllabic words. Now, and so when they review all of the studies on this, it showed a strong level of evidence, like it's a must do. And we'll see that multisyllabic words becomes a significant challenge for struggling readers, because once you hit 4th grade, the number of multisyllabic words goes way up, and you can't use the strategies that you utilize to read single syllable words, where you said each sound and then blended it together. You have to break it down into decodable chunks and figure out those chunks and then blend the chunks together. So we'll look at that recommendation. And none of this is going to surprise you. They also found strong evidence for working on fluency building. And so that the students would have automaticity, that they would have instant recognition of words in permanent memory, so that they would be able to read with fluency, which contains, as you well know, accuracy, and not just accuracy, but appropriate rate with automaticity, as well as expression or prosody. And that they would also have a set of comprehension building practices. So we're going to look at what they recommended in terms of those practices. Things like teaching them write their questions, or teaching them where you would search and find information to answer and respond to comprehension. Now notice these 3 all have strong evidence. And so when I broke apart my manual, I just wanted to show you how complete the review of research is. So the manual is thick, but this section, the appendix, has all of the research studies that they reviewed. And what were the findings, what population it was done with, and what was the effect size? Did it make a difference? And so that is why this is so critical document, is the level of research review that would support these 3 strong level evidence recommendations. And Now, there was a fourth that we're not going to actually touch upon today that was a moderate level of evidence, and that was that students could also be given much more complex text, challenging text, which they call stretch text, where they could utilize their decoding skills, their fluency skills, their comprehension skills to expose them to more complex ideas and information. But we're just going to look today at the ones that have the strongest level of evidence. Now, they did exactly what we would want to do. They took each of these and they broke them down into action, how-tos. So we're going to look at each of them, the how-tos. And I know some of you are teaching students that are younger, but the how-tos would be very applicable to your work with younger students. And you can take this back to your colleagues who teach in your district, because every district represented here has some students that need in the upper grades to significantly lift their reading skills. So let's start with the first recommendation, which is teaching them skills that would allow them to have decoding skills to read more complex multisyllabic words. And so first, what is the rationale that we'd want to do this? Well, I gave you a little one already, and that was that when you hit fourth grade, the percentage of multisyllabic words goes way up. And so students need ways to attack those unfamiliar words so that they can figure out the pronunciation of the words and match it to their speech. So it goes right directly to print to speech. One of the challenges is that multisyllabic words often carry the meaning. And so even as we look at this sentence, the word multisyllabic is a multisyllabic word, and that is carrying the meaning within this sentence and the word meaning. So that's what you see as you read articles fourth grade on, is that often the meaning is carried in the multisyllabic words. Reading this one with me, students need a strategy to assist them in breaking down and decoding unfamiliar words. And this goes to the fact that we have taught them up to now when they have a word, let's say it's like text, that they would sound it out by saying each sound and blending it together. Text, text. However, when you have a multisyllabic word, if you went sound by sound, it'd be very difficult to get the meaning of the word. And so the students need to be able to break it down into decodable parts and blend those parts together. So they need a strategy. And finally, there's many benefits. If I can have a strategy for reading multisyllabic words, that I am going to be able to read those words as I come to them in text and utilize the letters that are there, the prefixes and suffixes, the vowel sounds that are there to pronounce the word. So we're again going from print to speech. I'll be more confident, I'll have more interest in what we're doing. Because I'm successful, I'll have more motivation. So these are the big ideas for the rationale that you'd find as you read your own practice guide. So next thing they did is they broke it down into how-to steps. And then we're going to look at each of these and how you carry them out. So first they said, and I'm going to read, when I stop, you say the next word. Identify the level of students' word reading skills in the intervention group and teach vowel and consonant letter sounds and combinations as necessary. So this is basically a pre-skill. Remember yesterday when we talked about when you're teaching a lesson to go back and review necessary pre-skills? Well, if we want to teach a more complex strategy, we need to look at the pre-skills, and embedded in that, you have to know the consonant letter sound associations. And the most difficult consonant letter sound associations, of course, are C and G, because both of them have a major and minor sound. But in our work with rewards, we found that the major challenge is vowel sounds, particularly the short vowel sounds, but also vowel combinations. So they need to be in place in order to use a strategy. And then how to step number 2 is to teach them a routine, teach them a strategy. And step number 3 is, and read it with me, embed spelling instruction in the lesson. So when I look at a word and I sound out the word, I go from print to speech. When I spell the word, I say it and write the letters, I go from speech to print. And what research has shown is if I want to build better decoding skills within you, I'm going to do both. I'm going to have exercises that go print to speech, and I'm going to have exercises that go from speech to print. So encoding and decoding. What is fascinating is, particularly if you look at Steve Graham's research, is that spelling exercises increase our ability to read words. And if I teach you decoding skills and we read words, it will also improve your spelling. So these are truly reciprocal, decoding and encoding. So both of them need to be included. Last one, and reading it with me, engage students in a wide array of activities that allow them to practice reading multisyllabic words accurately and with increasing automaticity. So I teach the pre-skills, I teach you a routine, and we read multisyllabic words, we spell multisyllabic words, and we get a lot of practice in words and in sentences and in passages. So then they took each of these and broke them down. That's what we're going to do. And so let's look at how they would recommend as we carry out each of these how-to steps. And first, how-to was to teach students vowel and consonant letter sounds and combinations. And so this is, I'm sort of illustrating this with what's familiar to me, how we did this in rewards. So these were the vowel sounds that we taught. And we only taught high frequency vowel sounds. We have some that appear in just a few words in English. Well, remember when we teach, we're looking at teach this stuff and cut the fluff. I can teach you 3 words. I don't need to spend a lot of time teaching the sounds for that. So we taught the most common ones. And so looking at the single letter vowels, they have both a sound and a name. And so, for example, the sound is ah and the name is a. The sound is eh and the name is e. The sound is I and the name is I. The sound is ah and the name is o. The sound is and the name is you. Now, in words, what is most common is the use of the sound. So we actually teach children, first try the sound, then try the name. First try the sound, then try the name. And then we want to be certain that they have vowel combinations. And so you have so much of this knowledge. You're going to say the sounds with me. And this sound is A. Next sound is ah. And what sound? A. Now, we have a few here that have what's called a major and a minor sound. And so EA's major sound is E, and its minor sound is eh. So if you had this in a word, first you would try E, then you would try eh. And what sound? E. What sound? O. What sound? Oi. And another one with a major and a minor sound. And what sound? Ooh. And its minor sound is I'll never forget one day, we have this on video, I was teaching 7th graders rewards and I made them go, ooh, ooh, ooh. I had fun. And OU is what sound? Ow. And over here we have another major and minor sound. So the most common sound of OW is O, and the minor sound is ow. And what sound? Oi. What sound? R. What sound? What sound? What sound? Or. What sound? So they're suggesting that we be certain that this pre-skill be a part of their repertoire. And I will tell you, all of our work found that in terms of decoding long words, that the biggest challenge was the vowels had not been taught to mastery. And so we really, really have to teach this to mastery. So now, when we teach this, we would use I do it, we do it, you do it. This sound is O. Say it with me. O. What sound? O. But the students would need a lot of practice, cumulative practice over time, so that they would have it at the point of automaticity, because we really want them to be able to say O, oi, ah, ow, I. If you're going to use this as a tool for reading multisyllabic words, you have to have automaticity. Now, that's where they ended in terms of pre-skills. However, we found that another thing that we needed to teach students was the pronunciations of prefixes and suffixes. Why? 80% of all multisyllabic words have at least one prefix or suffix. So knowing those chunks within words makes it so that I have a much easier time figuring out the pronunciation of multisyllabic words. Now, here is something that we have to be alert to, and that is that there's a few prefixes that are not pronounced as you'd expect, and many suffixes that are not pronounced like you'd expect. For example, when A is at the beginning of the word and is a prefix, it's not a, but a. Now it's ab and ad and b, those are lovely. But when you have com, it's not come, but it is, excuse me, not com, but come, not con, but kun. So we have to teach them that in these cases, the pronunciation has been altered because the vowel sound is different. But D and dis and N and X and M and in and miss and per and pre and pro and re and un are pronounced like you'd expect. But those three prefixes we have to teach carefully. And in terms of suffixes, though, we really have to be careful because many of the pronunciations are not how you'd expect. It is not able but a bull. It's not age but udge. It is not al, but ul. That's why we had words here to remind you of the pronunciation. So, but these are very high frequency suffixes. And if you have a word and you are sounding it out like this one, ban, and you know ish with automaticity, it really helps you read the words. So teaching prefixes, particularly vowel sounds, but I'd recommend going beyond it, pre-teaching the pronunciation of prefixes and suffixes. Well, so how do we teach them? In the same way. So if I was introducing this as a prefix, I would do, this is pronounced dis, say it with me, dis, by yourself, dis, and then I would give lots of cumulative practice over time so that they came automatically and that they would know that as a prefix, this is not ab, but and this is not com, but come. And so first thing, be certain to have the pre-skills, particularly the letter sound associations, and particularly those for vowels. And this one, next, and read it with me. Teach students a routine that they can use to decode multisyllabic words. Teach students a routine or strategy that they can use to decode multisyllabic words. Now, when the panel reviewed this, they found that there were, in research studies, a number of different strategies. But this is one point that they made. Yes, there are many different ones, but teach them one routine. Teach them one routine, one strategy that you're going to use again and again and again and again and again. Teach them one strategy that you're going to use again and again. The students became confused if there was different ways that you would divide the word into decodable parts. So teach them one strategy. And basically, no matter what strategy you pick, it first should break the word into parts that the students can read, and then they're going to blend the parts into a word. Again, this is so critical because if I go letter by letter, as I did with single syllable words, I won't be able to come to the correct pronunciation. So I need to be able to break it into parts. And explicit instruction. If we're going to teach them a strategy, what steps are we going to use? Put your 3 fingers up, touch your fingers, and say, for teaching any strategy, what are the 3 big steps? I hope you had. I do, we do, you do. Demonstration, guided practice, and independent practice. So yes, we're going to teach the strategy. Now, the strategy that we use in rewards is the strategy that much of the research was done on. And it's the one that I recommend because we have field tested this and it makes a difference. It relies on breaking it into parts based on 2 major decoding variables. So the strategy is circle the prefixes, the overt strategy, circle the suffix, and then underline the vowel sound in rest of the word. And so we have broken it down into decodable chunks using prefixes and suffixes so that they could peel those off, and then using the reality that every part has to have a vowel sound and using that to determine the number of remaining parts. And then we say the parts, reconstruction. Then we say the whole word, reconstruction. But then we make it a real word. We ask ourselves, is that a word that is already in my speech, already in my personal lexicon? And if not, I might have to adjust the pronunciation. Because in English, you often get close, but no cigar in terms of reading multisyllabic words. Circle the prefixes, circle the suffix, underline the vowel, say the parts, say the whole word, make it a real word. Now, those steps are very overt. Circling, 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 underlining. And we do know from research that is in many different areas that our students often benefit from initially the steps in the strategy being very overt. But then what we want to do is fade out those overt scaffolding, like circling. We don't want them to go through life and to go to college and say, oh dear, there's a long word. Let me circle the prefix, circle the suffix, underline the vowels, say the parts, make it a real word. We want to move to a covert in the head strategy. And so first we teach a very overt strategy. Circle the prefix, circle the suffix, underline the vowels, say the parts, make it a real word. Circle the prefix, not com, but come. Circle the suffix, a T, underline the vowel sound, community, community. And then we move to a covert strategy after lots of practice. Then you look for the prefixes, you look for the suffixes, you look for the vowels, which help you break it into decodable chunks. You say the parts in the word, you say the whole word, and you make it a real word. So there's more than one strategy. This is the one that since 1984, Mary Gleason and I have been researching, and it works well. So you could use this, but you might want to look at some of the other available strategies. Now, but remember, that is teaching them print to speech, and which is decoding, and encoding is speech to print. And so read the third how-to step. Embed spelling instruction in the lesson. Well, if you look at the research on spelling and ask yourself what is the most important activity that you could do with students, it would be dictation. And even before fourth grade, if I was teaching students early decoding, I'd include in every one of our lessons dictation. So we have the reading, decoding, print to speech. We have the encoding, speech to print within it. So do you have a piece of paper next to you? I hope you do, because you're going to write now. Okay, pretend you don't see that word. It was just for me. And students, our first word today is inventiveness. Say it, inventiveness. Say it again, inventiveness. They haven't seen the word. Don't show it to them because they want it to come from memory. Let's segment it into oral parts. Put your hand on your desk and we're going to tap it out and go. Inventiveness. One more time. Inventiveness. Excellent. And write the word on your paper. Okay, and look at my word here, inventiveness. and compare it to yours. If you missed it and have any errors, cross the word out and rewrite it correctly. So that is the routine that we use for dictation. So we could embed spelling instruction with words that they have practiced reading and simple dictation. But the things that are important in dictation are that you tell them the word and you segment it into oral syllables, and they say those syllables as they write each part. But here's the really important part, is that you give them visual feedback. In all spelling, you show them the written word. Some teachers just spell it out loud. Inventiveness is inventiveness. But we can't process it that way. We need to see inventiveness. So just remember, if you are ever doing dictation, all feedback needs to occur immediately after the word's written, not after you've written four, and it needs to be visual. Okay. So, and step number 4 is, and read it with me and go. Engage students in a wide array of activities that allow them to practice reading multisyllabic words accurately and with increased automaticity. So often when I've introduced a strategy for multisyllabic word reading, such as circle the prefix, circle the suffix, underline the vowel, say the part, say it fast, make it a real word, teachers say, oh, I can teach that tomorrow and we'll just wrap it up. No, it takes so much practice to get this to automaticity. And if we're talking, I could teach the same strategy, of course, in general ed, but then we'd have to constantly practice it. I could do it with students that are struggling readers, but they need practice. So for example, in rewards, we found they needed hundreds of words to practice over time. In the practice guide, they suggest you could practice it with words in isolation, list the words. You can practice it with words embedded in sentences, and you could practice it within passages. And of course, we would want all of these, particularly within context, so that the students would be able to generalize it to their own reading. So let's just look at examples of this kind of practice. So here, we had students practicing where they would look at a word, they would underline the vowels, and then they would read the parts. Teammate. What sound? Eh. What part? Bed. What sound? Ooh. What part? Room. Read it. Bedroom. But then we also would go further where they had to circle the prefix, circle the suffix. When there's multiple suffixes, you circle the one at the end and then the next, and underline the vowel sound. And then you read considerable. Considerable. This takes considerable amounts of practice. And no prefix. Li is a suffix, ol is a suffix, ik is a suffix. And then what vowel sound? What vowel sound? And then I sound it out. Dra, mat, ik, ol, li. Dramatically. And that's how we have to teach, with a little drama to keep them interested. But look at the kind of words, if our students have been taught well, that they'd be able to read. And if you're a teacher who works with older students, you think, oh my God, they could read words like standardize. Yep. Organization. Yep. And another thing that we did for words in isolation is also teaching students word families, so that they would be able to generalize what they've learned to other words. Predict, predicts, predicted, predictor, prediction, unpredictable. So it is another way to practice it in isolation. So we have single words, but we can also practice it within sentences. And so these are the kind of sentences that are just laden with multisyllabic word. The clown's performance was so marvelous that the spectators stood up as they clapped. So you might have the students first read it to themselves, which would give them an opportunity to stop and figure out the words. We tell children if they are having difficulty, just pick up your pencil, circle the prefix, circle the suffix, underline the vowel, say the part, say it fast, make it a real word. And then you might read it together. You might also use the sentences to work on prosody, because many of our students would read like this: the clown performance was so marvelous that the spectators stood up as they clapped. So you could read it with them at a moderate rate, modeling prosody. The clown's performance was so marvelous that the spectators stood up as they clapped. And then they could practice reading it with a partner with prosody. We'll see later, that's another way to build fluency, reading something more than one time and having a different goal, such as accuracy the first time, reading at an appropriate rate the next time, and then reading it with prosody. So we could practice with sentences, and then we could practice multisyllabic words within passages. And so if you look here, you'll see that these passages have abundant multisyllabic words. But the students need the practice that matches what they're going to do, so it will generalize. So they're going to practice reading multisyllabic words within these passages. Okay, so we have the first goal. Well, I just included another one, and this was about Wilma Rudolph. And again, words like determination, adversity, triumph, just filled with multisyllabic words. And so that the students might read a portion to themselves and then read it with the teacher and reading it to a partner, so they might even read it more than one time. But it gives them a chance to read words like determination and adversity within the context that they're going to learn something from too. And I read this as I was preparing last night, and I was reminded what an interesting person Wilma Rudolph was, because she actually had a disability that she had polio and had difficulty learning to walk, and then ended up being a fantastic runner. A really good story, a true story, of course. Now, here's one of the reasons you should look at the manual you're getting, because they consistently have beautiful charts like this that's telling you what are the kinds of activities that you could do that would strengthen the student's ability to read multisyllabic words. But the big how-tos were to be certain that they know the vowel sounds, to teach them one strategy that you introduce and use again and again and again, and give them practice in single syllable words, words embedded in sentences, words embedded in passages. Now I want to just check in with Michelle to see, Michelle, did we have any questions on this first segment?
At one point I saw a hand raised, but I haven't seen them come back around to ask a question. So if you do have that question, why don't you throw it in the chat right now?
All right. So So the first recommendation was a strategy. And the biggest errors that I find in teaching strategies is teachers think that they could teach it in one lesson and move on. But it takes a lot of practice. And you saw that the pre-skills needed, the being able to pronounce the vowel sounds and being able to pronounce the prefixes and being able to teach the suffixes would have to be spread out over time. So we're talking some time here. Okay, Michelle, we'll go on and we'll give you a chance to collect more questions. You have some, put them in the chat box. We had very rich questions yesterday, and I know that you would add them today. All right, recommendation number 2, and read it with me. Provide purposeful fluency building activities to help students read effortlessly. Now, effortless reading means that you have a huge number of words that are automatic. And so you've read the words a number of times, and thus they are automatic for you. They are stored and quickly retrieved from your permanent memory. So the biggest predictor of fluency is the number of words already that you have, so that you look at the print and it immediately connects it, what we call orthographic mapping. And then with that automaticity, you're able to read more quickly. So what do they suggest? One is provide a purpose for each repeated reading. So many of us who've been in this field for many years know that one way to build automaticity and fluency is through repeated readings. So the students read something one time and they figure out the number of words that they read per minute, and then they read it again and see if they can read more, and they read it again. And David Chard did a beautiful review of research a number of years ago that showed that repeated readings made a difference. But they're taking it one step further. Instead of not just doing 1 reading, 2 reading, 3 reading as a way of building fluency, but also giving each one a purpose. So to me, this is the thing to really carry out in terms of fluency building, automaticity building in any situation, is rereading again with a purpose. And they suggest that some of the instructional time be focused on prosody or expression. And so we already talked about that when I modeled lack of prosody and expression. And that they also think that it would be very helpful, given a number of studies on this, to have students read a whole range of short texts that they don't read again and again and again, but read once. So for example, maybe I am a resource teacher working with students in 7th grade. And we might even be using rewards, but on Friday, the last 20 minutes, we read a short article that might match a topic of interest to them. And so that they would have opportunities to read different styles of writing, different content. It could be on a new electronic game. It could be a newspaper article on their football team at the high school. So these are 3. So let's dive into them and look at what they would recommend for each of these how-to steps. So the first one, they went through, well, what is fluency? Because we often just equate it with pace, but reading it with me and go. Fluency is the ability to read text accurately with ease, expression, and appropriate pacing. And so that they expanded it, not just appropriate pacing, which would be, as Jan Hasbrook, who I'm sure that name rings bells with you because she is sort of the queen of fluency in writing articles about fluency, automaticity. And she defines it as if you were orally reading and I was measuring your fluency, it would be at the same rate as speech. So it would be good speech. So this would be an example. Fluency is the ability to read text accurately with ease, expression, and appropriate pacing. Non-example. Fluency is the ability to read text accurately with ease, expression, and appropriate pacing. So we end up with some students racing through it, and that is not what we're looking for. We're looking for a rate of speech. And with expression, not fluency is the ability to read text. Fluency is the ability to read text accurately with ease, expression, and appropriate pacing. So that gives us an idea of what we mean by appropriate pacing. And ease, because I'm recognizing these words with automaticity, there is an ease in my reading. And expression or prosody. And we know the reason for this, that if I am reading and I have to stop and sound out words, that is going to take my cognition away from the meaning. And the end result is that will reduce my comprehension. So reading this with me and go. When students read fluently, they can turn their attention from sounding out the individual words to making sense of what they are reading. So that is the goal of being automatic, is to be able to concentrate, put my attention, my cognitive energy on the understanding, not on the decoding of the words. And they talk about 3 activities for building fluency. And all of them are ones we could use throughout the grades. So 1 is repeated reading with a purpose. We read for the purpose of accuracy. We read it again for the purpose of appropriate pace. We read again for prosody. See, maybe you work with 2nd graders, same kinds of fluency building activities for your 2nd graders, for your 3rd graders. But reading it more than one time with a purpose. And building, working on prosody. So reading it with expression could be one of those purposes. And then reading a variety of texts. So let's look at all of these. And we could have the students read silently. Here is the problem with silent reading. You may have noticed this, that you have a lot of students who might be silent reader fakers. They look down, they look up, I'm done. And they haven't actually read it. So you have to be careful about silent reading. It has to be for a purpose that you could hold them accountable for. Like, now we're going to answer questions on it. Oh my God, I should have read it. I'm finding, particularly with younger students, having them whisper read it to themselves. So the benefit is if when they're whisper reading to them, I can hold them accountable for actually reading it. I can even come over and listen to them personally read it. So whisper reading is just very quiet so you don't interrupt anybody. We could also have partner reading, where as one of the readings, and we could also have choral reading where we read it together. What's the biggest teacher mistake? It's voice mistake I make sometimes, is reading it too fast. It needs to be at a moderate pace so that they're able to read it with us. Well, let's look at the first how to do hint. Provide a purpose for each repeated reading. So you choose fairly short, content-rich passages. You know, if I am working with students in the upper grades, I would almost always use informational passages, and not narrative. Why? Because they are behind in vocabulary, they are behind in knowledge. I want to use every opportunity to stuff them with knowledge, stuff them with information, stuff them with vocabulary. And I'm going to do that more often with informational text. So I would select short, content-rich passages that have multisyllabic words embedded in it, and vocabulary that has already been taught. And we would read those passages, they suggest 3 to 4 times. In most of the work I've done, we've read them for the purpose. This is purposeful work on fluency building. We read them 3 times. And each time with a different purpose. So here's some possibilities. We could work on pace. We could work on expression. We could respond to questions. These are, and they could identify words that they don't know. Now, so these are exactly in the order that's in the practice guide. But let's think about this for a moment. If we're going to read something more than one time, I would start with having them read it for the purpose of accuracy. And they might underline words that they're uncertain of after they've even tried the pronunciation. So working first on reading it to yourself with accuracy, underlining words that you were unable to decode or you don't know the meaning of. And then we'll go over those. And then I might have them practice reading it to themselves with either the purpose of reading it at an appropriate pace or reading it with expression. And that could be done with a partner or to themselves, or we could read it together. And then we could read to respond to questions. So sort of going from accuracy to pace in the lesson to comprehension. But each one has a definitive purpose. Well, and prosody. Now, I sort of already modeled this with sentences. And what I love to see today for those primary teachers, we have kindergarten teachers, we have first grade, second grade teachers, is that more programs for beginning decoding have sentences that the students practice reading with prosody. And that simply means, and read it with me, prosody refers to reading with expression, appropriate pitch and tempo, and pauses at the right places. Pause at the commas, stop at the period. Pause at the commas, stop at the period. And that's what I said here. So pause at the commas, stop at the periods. And voice goes up or down with the question mark and excitement with an exclamation mark. You can see I just recently taught this to some younger kids where I added a little bit of rhythm to it as we learn this. So one of our readings could be working on prosody. Now, this is the one that we didn't include in rewards. We didn't include it in the secondary rewards, but I think it's a really good suggestion and has, again, very good studies to support it. A period of their intervention time, maybe 15 minutes on Friday, 20 minutes on Friday, where they read short articles that with the purpose of having them, in this case, only read it once, unlike the other times where we're really working on automaticity, so we read it more than one time for fluency's sake. But here we're just going to read it once. And again, as I already said, it could be a variety of articles. So maybe we have a band that's popular in a community, and in the paper, there's a short article about them. Or the students are really, really, really interested in soccer. Many of them on a team, and we have a soccer team article that we read. So there would be a variety of topics. And because they're written by different people, there will be a variety of sentence structures, writing styles, and having unfamiliar words. So the purpose here, if you think about it, is generalization. We're very intentionally teaching you a strategy for reading long words. We're very intentionally working on automaticity by multiple readings of passages for a purpose. But then we want to generalize these skills to the vast amount of reading that you might do. So you just become more familiar with, different topics, different sentence structures, different writing styles. All right, a very good addition. Even if I was teaching rewards, I would now do that. All right, let's take 5. This is time for you to put questions in. It could even be on decoding or fluency for the primary grades, if you wanted to do that. And then we will look at what they recommend for comprehension building. So take 5. I'm going to set our timer. And I will see you in 5 minutes. And Michelle, you can gather up some questions, hopefully, before we go forward.
I will monitor the chat for us.
Right. You can see how useful this practice guide is, right, Michelle?
It's fantastic. Yep, my head is already going with all sorts of ideas. So I'm sure everybody else is in the same place.
Great. Well, that was irritating. Forgive me. I rushed down to get a cup of coffee. It's morning here, and at 8 o'clock would be a good time for a cup of coffee. So, Michelle, did we have any questions that people asked?
Right now, the one question I see is a question about whether or not you have any website recommendations for finding articles on a variety of topics. The individual said they've used ReadWorks, but are wondering if there's others that you really like.
So ReadWorks is one that has passages that might be used for those quick passages for reading a variety. And I'll tell you what, let's ask everybody if we were looking for short passages to read, if they have any recommendations, and put that in the chat box, and then we will get that list to them. We'll make up a list. So we'll use all of our South Dakota resources for this.
And we've started putting some things in the chat. Everybody just keep on it and we'll have a great list.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, you can see I'm pretty excited about this practice guide. And I'm telling you, we need to utilize the resources of the Institute of Educational Sciences, because they spent a whole year reviewing the studies to come up with these recommendations. Well, we're going to go to the third one. And again, it is not going to shock you at all or surprise you. It is just the great intentionality of teaching the critical stuff, cutting out any fluff, so that we can make as much difference with these students as possible. So we've worked on a decoding strategy for attacking multisyllabic words, but there's lots involved in it in terms of the pre-skills. And we looked at building fluency, both in terms of accuracy, in terms of pace, and in terms of prosody or expression. And then the third recommendation is around comprehension. And so, reading it with me, routinely use a set of comprehension building practices to help students make sense of the text. And so this one had so much. For example, here I've laid out the portion of the IS practice guide that looked at recommendations 1 and 2. But here I have what they have included for recommendation 3. And so in 3A, they review the research on teaching students world and word knowledge. Remember that if I have a passage in front of me and I want to have good comprehension, which is an outcome, I have to be able to read the words. I have to know the meaning of those words and have some background knowledge. I have to be able to read the words. I have to be able to read the words fluently also. And I have to have vocabulary and background knowledge. And that is what they're going to address in part A. In part Part B, they're going to suggest that the students can respond to questions and they have strategies also to generate their own questions. And part C, we're going to look at, and that is that they would be able to get the gist of what they have read. And then the last one, which I'm going to leave up to you to get and read yourself, is they have to monitor their own comprehension. And so this is kind of like a beautiful little review of you on what we know about comprehension. But I always just want us to be reminded of the fact that comprehension is an outcome. Comprehension is an outcome. It's not a strategy, it's an outcome. I can read the words. I know the meaning of the words. I have the necessary background knowledge, and I have my attention on the critical information. And the outcome is comprehension. So comprehension is not a strategy, it's an outcome. All of those things in place. So if I was a second grade teacher and the students were going to read a passage and I wanted them to have good comprehension, they'd have to be able to read the words accurately and fluently. I'd have to pre-teach the vocabulary and any background knowledge that was necessary. And then I would have to have ways to help them keep their attention on the critical content. All right, well, let's look at ABC and see what they have to guide us. So first, how to is for just A, 3A, is develop word knowledge, world knowledge that is relevant for making sense of the passage. One thing that we're finding is increasing focus on knowledge as a predictor of comprehension. So that we have more and more core programs that are coming out and not only teaching decoding and working on fluency, working on vocabulary, but giving students world knowledge. And so what can we do to help them with world knowledge? And so reading this with me, and this is one for us to remember no matter what level we teach, students need enough knowledge about a topic to read and understand a text topic. In fact, the amount of knowledge that you have is extraordinarily predictive of your comprehension. The amount of knowledge that you had is very predictive of your comprehension. If you can read the words and read them accurately and fluently, next comes, what is your level of knowledge? You know, one of my favorite studies in this area was done with middle school students. And they had a group of middle school students and they tested them first on their fluency so that they had a fluency measure. Because perhaps maybe just your automaticity in reading it would be predictive of your comprehension. But then the passage the students was going to read was a narrative, but it was about baseball. Now think of all of the knowledge you have to understand baseball. You have to know what home plate is, and first and second and third. You have to know what a home run is. You have to know what a hit is versus a run. You have to know who the pitcher is and the catcher is and the first baseman and the shortstop and the outfield. Pretty good, aren't I? I have a nephew who is on a college team as a catcher. And so I have been watching his games and learning about it. And I watched PBS 18 hours of baseball history. So now I can name all those. Okay, so they measured the students' knowledge of baseball. And then they read this article and answered comprehension questions and had to explain their answers. Well, so they had students that had high fluency, but low baseball knowledge, and they had low comprehension. They had students with low fluency, but high baseball knowledge, been on the team, went to see teams, and they had high comprehension. So they learned from that study, reinforced what we already knew intuitively, but that knowledge makes a significant difference in terms of comprehension. So what they suggested is that before the students read, that they would have 3 to 5 minute introduction on the topic, so that they would have looked at it, read it, and said, here's what the students need to know. Here's what knowledge they have. We also know that if you're reading something and you already have some knowledge, that you can connect your reading to that knowledge. Okay, so in intervention, when we're reading passages, we're going to give them a quick introduction to the topic. And it could be, we might read something as easier to read that gives some background knowledge. Or we could show a short video clip to give them background knowledge. Or we could have a little quick presentation, maybe even with illustrations. That's what we did in rewards, is we gave them background knowledge as we also taught vocabulary, and we used PowerPoints with illustrations. But watch the research on this. Michelle, would you remind me to send them a recent article reviewing knowledge as a part of comprehension?
Absolutely.
All right.
We are also getting a couple of questions. I don't know when you want to stop.
Okay, well, let me just a second here. Let me go back. Okay, let's stop right there. And what questions do we have?
Okay, so we have 2 questions and they're kind of similar.
Yes.
The first one is, some teachers in the upper elementary and middle school levels believe the best way for struggling readers to improve is to read more. Therefore, they devote 30+ minutes each day to sustained silent reading or independent reading. What are your thoughts on this instructional practice?
Don't do it. And why would I say that? Because what the students need is your expertise. It is not just practice that they need expertise. Expertise teaches them a strategy to read those words and teaches it very carefully over time. Works intentionally on fluency building, works intentionally on reading articles where we pre-taught knowledge, we pre-taught vocabulary. That is what we're there for. We are the experts. This is what Shanashan has concluded. This is what Jan Hasbrook has concluded. Now, getting them inspired to read outside of class would be something that would be useful. And so if I am a 4th grade teacher in general ed, I would encourage students to do independent reading independently outside of school. And what we found was that requiring a certain amount of time, like some schools will say you have to read 30 minutes outside of school every night, was not really viable in our lives today, because they got soccer practice one night and they got ballet another night. But on the weekends, they might read for 3 or 4 hours, just like you. And so what we set up was that you would read a certain number of books, and you had to get credits for, let's say, each term of 4 books you've read. And then you say, well, then I'll have them write book reports. Well, if you want to squash all independent reading, have them write reports. What if you had to write a report after every book you read? Do you read a few more, or you do reading that no one could observe, like in the bathroom? That's what I did as a little girl. I'd hide in the bathroom and read and read and read. What did we do? Well, here's what we found really helpful. I want you to independently read outside of school, and I'm going to have you read a certain number every term. And we'll go to the library and you can pick out those books and you can take them home and read them. But instead of having you write a book report, on Friday, we're going to dedicate a short amount of time to book clubs. And you're going to join your book club, and you're going to have to tell them about the book. So I read this book. It was about this character, and this was the character's problem, and this is what happened. I won't tell you what happened at the end, though, because you might want to read the book. And then the students had to decide if it was a book read or a cover read. If they just thought the kid read the cover but not the book, because they asked him some questions he couldn't answer, she couldn't answer, they say, come back next time and show us that you've read the book. And so then they get credit for their 3 books. That's the kind of program I would love to have you see for independent reading. Now,
can I do one more question, Anita?
Yeah.
All right. It's kind of in the same vein, but now it's a little different, which is wanting to know your thoughts on bringing in and using whole class shared novels where the teacher reads, students follow along, as a way to expose them to their literature, develop more of a passion for choice reading. Hopefully students track words and gain comprehension, hear phrasing and expression when hearing reading aloud.
You're teaching reading, not listening. Now, if I'm a 4th grade teacher and I want to read a novel to them for 15 minutes a day after recess to settle them down, I might do that. But there's a big difference between reading and listening comprehension. It's basically, it'd be the difference between me saying I want to be a better runner, so I'm going to watch videos of running, versus me actually walking and then jogging and then getting up to running. What you practice is what you gain. And so we have a lot of teachers who are reading to students more and more and having them read less and less, thinking they'll be exposed to literature and want to read the books independently, da-da-da-da-da. But only through practice of reading are they going to get better. So I would not choose to do that as a major part of comprehension. I would choose to have them read.
Fantastic. All right, thanks. We got all the questions covered.
Okay, but I bet we have some more questions emerging. Let us look at the next part, which is vocabulary. Vocabulary is a definite predictor of being able to understand what you are reading. So what they suggest is that you identify a number for the passage you're reading, a number of what they call essential words. I love that term because it means the ones that are most critical to the content and ones that could be very central to understanding that passage. So you're going to pick out a small number of these. And before reading, you are going to select 1 or 2 of those essential words, because these are short passages, and you are going to teach them the meaning of the words. Well, we saw that yesterday, where I introduced a word with a simple, brief explanation, and they were critical. Remember how often I even told the students, you had to understand this word. You had to understand what a stallion was and what a plain was and what a bluff was in order to understand this passage. And I gave them a definition and then provided an example, often a visual representation of the word. Before we read the passage, we taught them a number of words. And during the reading, we could stop and tell the meaning of additional words. So maybe we had a list of, there are 10 words that they need for this passage. I'm only going to teach these 2 that make a huge difference. I'm doing right now, I'm working on this kind of passages for students. And one of them was about students that were involved with adults in Los Angeles to make their own videos. And I read through it, and there were 2 major essential words. One was produce, to make a movie, and one was a project. So I taught those words beforehand because they were essential to the passage. But then there were other words that I introduced just by stopping and telling them with a short definition during reading. And then after reading, if I want them to learn produce, or project over time, then we're going to learn more about the meanings of those words. So before, during, and after. A few words before, taught with, I introduce the pronunciation, I introduce the meaning, I give you examples, may juxtapose it with non-examples, and then I check your understanding. But during reading, we're going to stop and I'll tell you briefly what's called fast mapping, the meaning of a few words. And afterwards, we'll go over the meanings of them. Well, and how to teach them how to figure out the meanings of unknown words in context. So I teach you a few words, but I also teach you what to do if you haven't been taught as an essential word and you need to understand it. And so they suggest that you do this, that when the students don't understand a word, that they would underline it. If it's a book, that they could underline. That they would read the sentence with the unknown word and look for cues to figure out the meaning. And if that's not enough, that they would read the surrounding sentences. Well, this reminded me of a strategy that I taught last summer to you who were participating, but is a useful one to teach. And I just like the wording. It's very memorable. It was a strategy called inside outside. So first you look inside the word at the parts of the word to see if it gives you any hints. Well, we are, maybe it's a prefix that you've been taught the meaning of. Maybe it is a root word that you already know. You look for hints inside the word. And if that is not enough to figure out the meaning of the unfamiliar word, then you read the sentence and look for hints. But if that's not enough, then you read the surrounding sentence for more hints. Look inside the word, then read the sentence, then read the surrounding sentences. And then ask yourself, what might the word mean? And try that meaning in the sentence to see if it makes sense. And ask yourself, does it make sense? So this is basically taking their strategy and making it more memorable. Look inside, look outside, look out further outside. Ask yourself, what does it mean? Try it in the sentence and ask yourself, does it make sense? So not just teaching them some words, essential words before and during and after, but teaching them how to figure out the meaning of an unknown word if a teacher's not available with a good definition. And as a part of that, teach them the meanings of prefixes and suffixes. And certain prefixes and suffixes in our research on rewards, we found more useful to teach than others because they were high frequency. Some prefixes and suffixes over time have lost their meaning. It's been embedded in words, and it's not as helpful to know the meanings. But for the ones that are useful. So I just put in here in your PowerPoint some good references for you. And so these are prefixes that we would teach to 2nd to 5th graders, but I would tell you most middle school kids don't know them. and they're in order of frequency of occurrence. So undis and in mean not. In fact, the major prefixes undis and in mean not, because they're meant to negate something. We coil, but then we uncoil it. We're aware, but we're unaware, not aware. We're loyal, but we're disloyal, not loyal. So it is used to negate. And re means again. So, and here are the more advanced ones. If the students learn all of those, you might teach these. And as another reference for you, the most common suffixes. Again, in order of frequency of occurrence. And more advanced suffixes. All right. Excuse me, you might even teach the meaning of Latin and Greek roots. So again, I provided you with a good reference. And when you have a word, maybe I am teaching, let's say, aquarium, and I say, ooh, it's a chance to teach them aqua, meaning water, but then teaching them other words that have aqua embedded in it. So these are just cool little reference. You got the slides of common Greek and Latin roots. Terrific. Okay. So
Anita,
yes.
Before we launch into one more thing, the
Yes.
conversation we started has generated one more question, which is piggybacking off of talking about class read alouds. What about whole class novels? Do students benefit from the whole class reading the same novel together, with the majority of the reading taking place in the classroom, and then in class and independent work on questions and activities that go along with the novel?
The kids are reading it, right?
It sounds like that, yes.
Right. And so if I'm a general ed teacher and we're going to read a novel, versus if I was doing intervention with 7th graders, I'd want to read things that were informational text so that I could build up their knowledge. But I could read a novel in 3rd grade as a whole class, 4th grade, yes. If it is used, and you would prepare the kids for a chapter, let's say, so that they might need background knowledge for the chapter. They might need vocabulary for the chapter. They might need a little idea of what it's going to cover. Who are the characters? There's some research that shows having a character map before you read a novel is particularly useful, showing the relationships. This was the mother, this was the father, this was the uncle, this was, and so that they could refer back to that as excellent background knowledge. And so then they could read it. They could read it silently. They could read it to a partner. We could read portions as a class. We could ask questions on it. Of course, that's reading. And I don't want to tell people never to read something aloud to children. I'm just saying that should not be assumed to improve their reading, because they're not reading. And that was it.
Actually, I think we're going into a deep dive here. The next question is, what if students have their own copy of a shared novel versus the teacher just reading aloud? So it's kind of back to that, when the teacher's reading aloud and they have their own novel.
And the teacher's reading it to them?
Yes, they have the print in front of them, but yeah.
Yeah, see there. So this goes into cognitive science, where we cannot process at the same time looking at the print and hearing it. And so if you're going to read it for enjoyment, and you just would have to say it's for enjoyment and maybe introducing them to literature, that's one thing. But just following along is not going to make a significant difference. They have to actually read it. So I would say if your purpose was to introduce them to literature or get them so that they know an author, and you're going to read them a story, then read it to them.
All right, thanks so much. I think we're done.
Okay, so we can move on. Boy, we got so much to cover today, but this is good. they're totally present. Yay.
Yes, I believe I think you're filling their cup up today.
All right. Well, so next one, this is part B. And so when I look over here at B, okay, so that's a whole nother section. You're getting basically a free book on reading instruction if you download this practice guide. So consistently provide students with opportunities to ask and answer questions to better understand the text they read. So this is, remember that comprehension is an outcome. I can read the words accurately and fluently. I understand the vocabulary. I have the necessary background knowledge, but I have to attend to the critical content. And we can teach that by asking them questions and having them locate the information. We can also do it by teaching them how to ask good questions about what they've read. And so how to, and reading it with me, explicitly teach students how to find and justify answers to different types of questions. And provide ample opportunities for students to work collaboratively with answering questions. So we're going to teach them how to answer different types of questions, which I'll share with you the categorization that they utilize for different types, and practice it with the students, but they could also collaborate with partners or teams on the answers. And they could also generate their own questions. I'm going to teach you different types. You're going to be able to do it with others, and you're going to be able to generate similar kinds of questions after reading text. Again, all of these had strong research supporting them as making a difference on the outcome of better comprehension of what you've read. So let's look at the way they categorize it. Now, I'm going to bet that the system that they used is very familiar to you, because the author, Raphael, this was written a long time ago and has been used over time. And it initially was 4 types, and 1 type was deleted. And I'll tell you why in a minute. So first, write their questions. So these are questions that are in one place in the text, and they are generally quite literal questions, and they are ones that are, the answer is totally dependent on what you have read. So when I ask you to write their question, you could either remember what the answer is or refer back to the passage and identify the part that answered the question. So for example, a write their question might be, what was the name of the main character? And what was the first setting of this passage? One place. And so right there. Next one, think and search questions, where you're going to have to look at different parts of the text to figure out the answer. So just last evening, I was working on an article and writing questions for it. And the article was about Katherine Johnson. Katherine Johnson, maybe you saw the movie about the mathematicians at NASA who were a Black group of mathematician women. And Katherine Johnson was one of them. And so I asked some write their questions after the students read a section. For example, how old was Katherine Johnson when she went to high school? 10. So how old was she when she entered college? 14. When did she graduate from college? 18. She was smart, very, very smart, an advanced mathematician. So those are right there questions. But then I asked some think and search questions, such as, there were a number of situations that really set her up for being able to be a masterful mathematician with NASA. What were some of those? Now, they can't answer it just by finding one. They had to find out that, well, her mother was very concerned about the quality of education because she had been a teacher. Her father said, I will ensure that all 4 of my children would go to college, which was very rare for women and for African-American students. And she excelled in math in all of her schooling. So those are the kinds of things that set her up for success, but I had to search for it. And the third kind of question is an author and me. And the author and me had to utilize information in the text, but also your own background knowledge. And so having that kind of question, so when she was at NASA, though the text doesn't describe this, but what would have been some of the barriers for her to be a mathematician at NASA? So you'd have to use your own knowledge of civil rights at the time to understand that. Very few women would be in that type of professional job, and very few African-American women would be professions in that as mathematicians. So, but we would teach them strategies. So we teach them to read the question, change the question into part of the answer, go back if it's right there, find it, underline it, and then complete the answer. If it's a think and search, you read the question, you change the question to part of the answer and write it down. And then you go back and underline evidence that you could utilize, and then you summarize that evidence within your answer. Or if it's an answer and me, you find information that you've learned, but you say, well, what would that mean? And you're asking it from your own background knowledge. All right, and we could teach this for individual students to answer questions. We could then expand it to where they would work collaboratively with partners to answer the same kind of questions. And then we could teach them to write their questions, or think and search questions, or author and me questions. Well, so remember the last one was that the students would be able to find the gist. And so I just wanted to share with you 2 strategies that are very well researched that are getting the gist. And this first one was a research project called PALS by Doug and Lynn Fuchs and Pat Mathis. And it was done by a paragraph. The students would read a paragraph, then they would ask themselves, name the who or what in the paragraph, tell the most important thing about the who or what, and then say that in 10 words or less, and say it or write it down. So this is a strategy that I've taught many, many times to children, many times to adults to teach their children. And it would be one that first could be teacher-led. We'd read a paragraph and I'd say, name the who or what this was about, tell your partner, call on someone, tell the most important thing, tell your partner what it was. Now I call on you. Now think of a sentence that's 10 words or less. That would put those 2 ideas together, basically the topic and the important details. Say it to your partner and call on them. So I could guide them through using this. But in the research by Fuchs, Maths, and Fuchs, they went a step further. And after the students could do this under teacher guidance, then they had them do it with partners, because the PALS program was a partner program. So then Michelle, let's say she's my partner. Today, she's going to read a paragraph. And then when we're done, we're going to stop and I'm going to say, Michelle, name the who or what, the main person, animal, or thing this was about. Now tell me the most important thing it told me about that who or what. Now say it in 10 words or less. Then the next paragraph I read, and Michelle afterwards says, name the who or what, tell the most important thing about the who or what, and say the main idea in 10 words or less. So it can go from teacher-driven to partners. But it also could go to an independent strategy. So I am reading, particularly this is good for informational text. I'm reading a paragraph. I stop and ask myself who or what is it about? What's the most important thing it told me about that? And then I could write down a summary sentence, a main idea sentence. So it goes from teacher-driven, partner-driven to individual. Well, Sharon Vaughn and a group of researchers revised it, particularly for older students, and particularly if they were reading more advanced material. So this is the same steps, but a little more advanced. Name the who or what in a brief phrase. Identify 2 or 3 important details about it, then shrink that down. And by writing, stating or writing the main idea in 10 to 15 words. Well, let's put this sort of all together. So one day I was teaching students who were in a social studies class in 8th grade, and they had been studying different countries that had once been colonies in the British Empire. And I got to work with them for 3 days, and I got to teach them about Kenya. And so I knew that they needed some background knowledge, like here is Africa, 50 nations in it, and one of them is Kenya. And Kenya is on the Indian Ocean, and it's surrounded by other countries in Africa. So they needed some background knowledge. And we looked at this more carefully. And then I wanted them just to have an idea, since this was an American 8th grade, between, yes, we were at one time a British colony in 1607, and we became an independent country on July 4th in 1776. Okay, so that they would have this information and we could compare it to Kenya. They were also under British rule. Later, about 300 years later, 1885, and quite recently, 1963, they became independent. So they would just have some basic knowledge about how Great Britain had colonies across the world, in Africa, in North America, in Asia, India, beforehand. And my learning intention was that the students would be able to write main ideas, statements that form a summary of an informative article. And so we used getting the gist. And now, if I'm going to teach you this strategy, I'm going to have to do what? 3 steps. I do it, we do it, you do it. So we read a paragraph, and then I modeled it. So first we named the who or what, the paragraph is about. And we looked for evidence. It is about Kenya's, the first paragraph about Kenya's borders. And then we identified 2 to 3 things that are important details. Well, it's bordered by Somalia, Tanzania, Uganda, and the Indian Ocean. And I said, oftentimes we can summarize by using categories. So it is in Ethiopia. It is, so here we're going to put it together that it is surrounded by 4 Somalian countries and the Indian Ocean. And then we shrink it down. And so we had underlined that. And I said, Kenya, an East African country, I used in a positive, is surrounded by 4 African countries and the Indian Ocean. So I modeled the process with them. And then we did one together. So we read the passage. We identified the who or what. This was about the history in Kenya. I had them go back and underline critical details that it said about the history. And one child suggested that it was a British colony and it became independent in 1963. And then they had to take the topic and the critical details and write down a statement that put them together. And this is one student's example. Kenya, once a British colony, became an independent country in 1963. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Good, it made the 10 to 15. Now, this is not an easy process, so we did many we-do-its over the course of the 3 days. So this one is another we-do-it. Read the paragraph. We actually read it first silently, and then we read it together to be certain they understood all the words. And then they had to underline words that could be utilized for the topic, shared it with a partner, called on a variety of students. Then they had to go back through and underline critical details and then put it together. The sentence that one student came up with is, conflict occurs in Kenya because the citizens have different cultures, traditions, histories, and languages. So we did many we-do-its. And in this class, we actually put it together in a summary, and we went back and revised it so that I could teach revision even as we wrote out their summary. All right, so now, after I read this whole practice guide, I said, wow, okay, we're going to teach them a strategy for reading multisyllabic words, which has many pre-skills in it, and then teaching them such as circle the prefix, circle the suffix, underline the vowel, say the part, say it fast, make it a real word. And then we're going to work on fluency through purposeful rereading, that we might read it once for accuracy, we might read it for pace, we might read it for prosody. And then we're going to work on comprehension. And when we work on comprehension, we're going to work on write there questions. We're going to work on search and find questions. We're going to work on author and me questions and whoosh, and getting the gist. But what I was reminded of was that even as I do this, I better use what we talked about yesterday in terms of delivery, requiring frequent responses, constantly monitoring their performance, giving them an adequate amount of feedback, including praise, informative and corrective feedback, and having a brisk pace. Now, no matter what you teach, I hope there was a takeaway in that. So I want you to add to the chat right now one takeaway just from this little book study we just did on the practice guide on older students, but something that might relate to you. Okay, and at the same time, add any questions that you have to the chat box. One takeaway and any questions, because then we're going to move after we take a little tiny break to writing. Oh, you guys are good. Even though you have different roles, you did an excellent job. So Michelle, combined decoding and encoding. Excellent, that we could use for across grades starting in kindergarten. And utilizing dictation within phonics lessons. Sarah said teaching 3 types of questions, having repetition. Everything that we taught here, repetition in the sounds, repetition in the pronunciation, the prefix and suffixes, repetition in terms of reading things more than one time. But all the goal of repetition is to move the information from working memory to permanent memory and to bring about automaticity. So it is all done with that specific purpose. And intentionally teaching how to break down words and what each part means. So yes, so embedded in that, we circle the prefix, circle the suffixes, underline the vowels, read the parts, but then we utilize the meaning of prefixes, suffixes, and roots to help us figure out the meaning of words. And Connie suggested that, and this, Connie, yay, because this is true. Comprehension is an outcome, not a strategy. It is an outcome. Have to be able to read the words accurately and fluently, have to understand the vocabulary, you have to understand the meaning. And on any passage, students might have lower comprehension because those 3 are not in place. And paragraph shrinking, boy, that's one, could be used in general ed. It could be utilized. I could use it in a social studies class in middle school, read a paragraph, name the who or what, tell the most important thing, say it in 10 words or less and write that down. Very generalizable. Shrinking down the paragraph, excellent. Paragraph shrinking. To use informational text. Because if I am a weak reader in 8th grade, that means I've not read much. And as a result, I don't have much vocabulary or knowledge. So while we're teaching them reading, have them read informational text to increase that. Pre-teach the pronunciation of prefixes and suffixes. Ooh, overt strategies. And that's for, remember yesterday when we looked at one from the writing, where it was writing a quick summary and they had a format to fill in, but it was very overt. Write the topic here, write the topic sentence here, write the details here, before they ever wrote a draft from it. Made it very overt. Make strategies overt. Yes, as a kindergarten teacher, one of my favorite programs is called ECRI, which is Enhanced Core Instruction. That's applied to different core reading programs, and they do prosody even in kindergarten. So we have a short paragraph or a short sentence, forgive me, and They figure out the words to themselves, then the teacher reads it with prosody, and then the class reads it with prosody. Then they might read it to their partner with prosody. The teacher might call on individuals to read it. Yes, totally transferable to kindergarten. What you practice is what they gain. You know, it's like I have a good friend who's an excellent chef. She was a vice president of a steel company. And when she retired, she went to Ireland and took a 6-month training program in being a chef. And so I said, well, do you watch cooking shows? She says, I only watch the cooking shows that you can cook along with, because just watching them, I might get a few ideas, but I actually get better when I cook along. The chef says, now you need to whip this until it is solid. And so then I whip, 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 whip. So even there, what you practice is what you gain. And including encoding and decoding, excellent. Jen says I'm going to use paragraph shrinking. The marking of the words and decoding so that students can see the parts in the words and then how they blend them. And I love getting the gist. Teach a routine for decoding multisyllabic words, just one strategy. Beautiful. Word knowledge to prepare students for comprehension. Knowledge, knowledge, knowledge. And comprehension is an outcome. I love the main idea statements. I'm going to use that. Teach decoding and encoding with lots of practice opportunities. And Kristen made me smile with I do it, we do it, you do it. One routine for breaking down multisyllabic words. Excellent. Repetition is key, both and have decoding and encoding. The importance of teaching multisyllabic words and those practices are what we're going to learn. Wow, beautiful job, guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, we have a very long handout and only an hour left in the day, but I'm going to teach you an important part of writing, which is what you can do to help students write very good sentences and how you can infuse that into your daily teaching. So I'm going to give you 5. I'm going to have some of my coffee. You're going to stretch your body, be back in your seat with our next handout. Thank you so much.
Anita, when you're coming back, I'll have one question for you. Anita, it looks like I've got about 3 questions so far.
Okay. Okay, our time is up. I hope that you are back. And Michelle, let's do those questions before we move to a different topic.
Thank you. So the first question is, when you talked about short-term memory to long-term memory, made me think of her own second graders and their spelling. They learn it for a short time to take the test, and then a week later, they're misspelling it in writing. What do you suggest?
Well, so that is just so human, because it is the amount of repetitions, the rehearsal, that would about lead to your ability to retrieve it. So probably I would look at the kind of words that are more likely to not be remembered. Okay, so if the word is one that is totally decodable, meaning that the letter sounds represent sounds that they have learned, and you've taught them that word, and then they have learned to say the sounds and write the corresponding letters. Well, on a test, they got it right, and 3 weeks from there, they're still getting it right. It is going to be words that have letter sound associations that do not have the usual sound that they are going to miss. So for example, if you have the word because, I can almost predict what happens in second grade. You've taught because, B-E-C-A-U-S-E, B-A-C-U-S-E, and the students then have B-U-C-U-Z, because, okay? Now, that is a word that has a sound that they have not probably learned and is not consistent. And so it's going to be more difficult to remember. And so you would, if you taught it, you'd say because, and let's find the part that would be not what we'd usually say. And we'd find AU because it's not because, it's because. And so those are the letters that are the tricky letters. So you'd intentionally teach the tricky letters in those words, and then you'd practice spelling it B-E-C-A-U-S-E. And so that the students would be more likely to remember it. But watch your own spelling. I'll never forget at Easter, I wanted to send a bouquet to my living great aunts, and so I was writing a message to Jonathan, my assistant, and I could not get bouquet accurate. So I wrote, send them an arrangement of, but it's because of the fact that it has letters in it that don't carry the usual sounds, making it less memorable. So then I had to look it up, write down the spelling of it, underline the tricky letters, and put a little concentration into it intentionally. Okay,
Wonderful.
so that's what I would do.
Wonderful. Next question, thoughts on working with students with cognitive disabilities and pairing more visual cues with words. Is this helping or hindering by doing this?
Okay, so the only hint for reading words is the letters that are present, period. I mean, that's the letters were designed to take our speech and put them as signals down on paper. And so we have studies with children who have a low intellectual functioning that have been taught to decode, maybe not at the 8th grade level, but at the 3rd grade level, and to utilize the cues on paper. For example, a number of studies that were done at University of Wisconsin in their special ed department with students that were moderate in terms of their intellectual abilities, and they taught them to use letter sound associations and sound out words. Now, but if I have students that cannot do that processing, would I use visual signals? Well, if they're going to learn to read, I wouldn't. I would use the only cues available, which are the letter sounds. The relationship of the letters to speech sounds, sounding out the words. There might be some times you use visual cues that, for example, maybe I want them to be able to identify an exit. And they're not going to be able to read the word exit, E-X-I-T, but I can teach them when a red sign is above a door and it has these letters, that might be an exit. In other words, I could teach a visual cue with it. I'll never forget a class that taught students men and women. The problem with men and women to identify your restroom is that they don't always use men and women. They might put it in Spanish. They might utilize other words like gents and ladies. And so I taught students when I did have the opportunity to teach students with cognitive disorders. I taught them to identify it. You have to go to the bathroom, you stand outside and you watch who goes in. And if you're a girl, you follow the girl in. If it's a boy, you follow the boy in. A very definite visual cue, because learning to read the various things on restroom doors didn't work out. But we've made the error of often having kids use other cues. We've made the errors of teaching them strategies like look at the pictures. That is not a decoding viable prompt. Guess what it might be based on the context. Nope, look at the letters and sound out the word. Guess by the first letter. No, you have to say the sounds for all the letters to come up with the word. We have taught students the wrong processes, and we must stop doing that. So if the kid is going to be able to learn to read, they're going to have to learn the letter sound associations and how to blend those sounds into words they recognize.
Oh, 100% agree on that. Last question, asking about Kilpatrick. Not everybody's probably read Kilpatrick, but if you have, the question is, he has a 1-minute strategy to enhance brain mapping. Kids don't look at the words, they listen and replace certain sounds with other sounds. What do you think about that?
Probably a little bit misinterpretation in his books, which I have in my library, all of them. David Kilpatrick basically is looking at the ability to understand that spoken language can be broken down into syllables. It can be broken down into onset rhymes. It can be broken down into phonemes or sounds. And you have to have some facilities in particularly hearing the sounds within words, phonemic awareness. And so his exercises are not necessarily meant to change your brain. What they are meant to do is to get you to attend to the speech that you utilize so you can hear the sounds within it. So then you can map the visual representations, the letters, onto those sounds. So is it useful to teach phonemic awareness? Absolutely. Our kindergarten teachers should be teaching phonemic awareness. Our 2nd grade teachers should teach phonemic awareness. Our interventionists should be teaching phonemic awareness, the ability to hear sounds. And then be able to match those with the letters.
Fantastic. All right, I think we're ready to go.
Okay, we are ready to go. And so, when Michelle and I sat down and looked at the previous year, at what was the best takeaways, there were some very simple things that I used as examples that contained writing, and they got the highest praise. So we decided to do a portion of the day on writing. Well, I wrote out a handout for you that goes way beyond our time. So you're going to have to forgive me for underestimating the amount of time that we would need. So the handout goes to sentences and paragraphs, and we're going to do sentences. And I feel that there is a reason for this. So if we look at what the students need to be able to do, given your own South Dakota standards, basically it talks about writing opinions or arguments in the upper grades, being able to write informational or informative text, and being able to write narratives. But the problem is that is so demanding. If you look at Foundation Skills IES Practice Guide in Writing, it talks about how it helps if you can read what you are writing. You need vocabulary. You need knowledge of word usage. You need fluent handwriting or typing. So that's sort of like fluent reading, where if I read fluently, I can put all my cognitive energy on comprehension. If I can write with automaticity and don't have to stop and think, how do I form a Z? Then I can put my cognitive energy in what I want to express through writing. I need spelling. I need some ideas of the structure of English sentences. I need capitalization and punctuation. You can see how demanding writing is. But when the IS Practice Guide on Foundation Skills in Writing said, this also means that you need to be able to form sentences and paragraphs before you can write these levels. So I just want us to remember how many things students need to have skill in to write. And we're going to focus particularly on how to teach sentences. And what I see in classes is often a total disregard of sentences as an absolute foundation to writing. So my colleague, Mary Gleason, along with Steve Isaacson, who is a professor who teaches writing, we wrote a whole intervention on teaching students to write better sentences because it's so fundamental to their ability to write. So this is my motto here. Writing is not caught, writing must be taught. Writing is not caught, writing must be taught. Many teachers seem to think if you can read, you can write. No, you need instruction in writing. That if you can speak, you can write. No, speech is different than written language. No, it needs to be taught. And we have not given enough energy to writing. But we can often infuse it into other things we're doing, like when we did getting the gist. Instead of having students just say the main idea statement, having them write it. So we could, when we're teaching decoding, we can do dictation, including dictations of sentences. And so we infuse it in what we are doing. We're teaching math, and we could write out an explanation of how we solve that problem. We need to have kids write and write and write some more, and write and write some more, if we expect them to be writers. But we're going to focus on sentences and a number of ways that you might look at sentences. So we're going to again look at I do it, we do it, you do it, because we would use that within, just like we did with the gist, where I model the strategy, we do it together, and then you do it. So sentence writing instruction, why is it so critical? It is, of course, the foundation of all written products. That whether you are writing a note to someone, whether you are, this morning I wrote a note on a card for a upcoming marriage. I needed sentences. Whether I am writing a book, which I am revising 6 of them at this moment, I need sentences. But also, this is important. Remember that in this look at, let me just go back here for a minute. We have in our standards to write an opinion, to write an informational text, to write a narrative, but embedded in all of those are the sentences. And I will tell you that these will all be weak. Even if they learn the structure of an opinion, they're going and have weak sentences, it still will be a weak essay. Now I have proof of that because I worked in New York City on a grant, and part of the grant, we taught students how to write an argument, an opinion. We taught them how to write an introduction where they grabbed the attention of the author, that they stated their claim and previewed the reasons. So we taught them how to write an introduction. Then we taught them to write the body, where they would take their reasons and they'd write a topic sentence with the reasons and then add details to it. And topic sentence and details, topic sentence and details, topic sentence and details. And we taught them how to write a closing where you wrap it up. And we taught them gestures with it. And all of the kids could say, well, in my opening, I got to grab their attention, state my claim, and preview the reasons. And in the body, reason and detail, reason and detail, reason and detail, and closing, wrap it up. And all the students were able to follow that structure and write an argument. But the sentences were so weak that the essays still ended up weak. That's when we said we'd better back up and write a curriculum to teach them how to write better sentences. So do not think sentences will skip over and just go right to an opinion, because that's what they're going to have to write for their state test. Nope. Teach them and practice writing a lot of sentences. So we're going to look at a number of ways to do that, because if your sentences are weak, even if you know the structure, your essay is going to be weak. And one of the major problems is that there's a difference between formal written English and conversational English. So the students need to be able to write in more formal English. Well, here's possibilities, and we're going to go through each of them, as many as we can. I'm doing dictation for decoding. I can include a sentence, and I could dictate that sentence, and they could write out the sentence and get feedback on it. I could ask a question, and then I could give them a sentence stem to start their question, and they could say or write out an answer. Or I could teach them patterns. And so I'm going to give you a project that we did, Dr. Gleason and myself, in summer schools, where we used patterns that were taught in a writing program called Step Up to Writing. Or I could infuse certain activities that have been field tested by Judith Hochman and written up in her book, The Writing Revolution. Or I could teach sentence expansion as we did in rewards um, sentence expansion within sentence refinement, or I could combine sentences. So there's 3 references that I used for this. Well, let's look at sentence dictation. We already talked about it as a critical part of teaching decoding. When we dictate words, the students write them down and we give them feedback on it. But we can also use sentences. So I plucked one out from a 2nd grade lesson that I had taught along with their spelling words for dictation. Now I'm going to dictate a sentence. In this case, there were 2 words that we had not learned how to spell. So I put those on the screen, war and Halloween, so they could incorporate it into the sentence. And then I dictated this sentence. Now you can look at this sentence and you can figure out the spelling pattern that we were working on. I hope you thought it was a final E, as seen in Jake, not a random name, fake, and cape. So I dictated the sentence. I didn't show it to them. It makes it too easy just to copy it. I dictated on Halloween. Jake wore a fake mask, a fake cape, and a mask. And then I pronounced the first part. On Halloween, Jake wore. And I had them write that down. And then I dictated the second part, a fake cape and a mask. And they added that. They reread their sentence to be certain that it made sense, checking out each word, and I gave them feedback. Remember, all feedback in spelling is visual. So they checked each word. Now, I wrote out for you today word dictation, but then this was the steps that we used that I just modeled for sentence dictation. So we have a place even in kindergarten at the end, certainly in 1st and 2nd and 3rd grade, but also with more advanced multisyllabic words embedded, we can dictate a sentence. Now notice that even in this sentence, I have a time on Halloween. And if we have it at the beginning of the sentence, like this Friday or on Christmas Day, we have a comma after it. So I could embed some punctuation. And this is a statement, so it has a period. So think of the richness that you could include in the sentences. Dictation. All right. Sentence stems. And so sentence stems is where you give a directive or you ask a question and you give the students verbally or in writing a stem for them to start with. And this can be definitely incorporated into writing that's infused in our sentences. In fact, if we go back to teaching them how to do those right there questions or the search and find questions, they could then respond with a sentence stem. So here is an example from a work that I'm doing in Hawaii, where they've adopted wonders. So we read this paragraph. We read it more than one time because we were working on fluency and automaticity. And then I posted this question, why do we celebrate Labor Day? And then we took the words from the question and turned it into part of the answer. We celebrate Labor Day because the students copied this and then they had to add to it to honor people who are in different jobs and careers. So they had to complete it. Now, let's say that I didn't use a sentence stem and they said an answer. It might be something. So why do we celebrate Labor Day? And I call on a child and they say, well, to thank them for what they do on jobs. I call on another student and they say, well, so that we have a holiday in September. And then call on another child and say, but in all those answers, they never use the words Labor Day. So one of the reasons we use sentence stems is to increase the use of the vocabulary that we're teaching. They also didn't use the word celebrate. So sentence stems, you ask a question in comprehension, you give them a sentence stem, and they're either going to respond to it verbally using the sentence stem or using a written answer. I've gotten in the habit now of doing this constantly in my instruction, is giving them a sentence stem so they end up with complete sentences and they end up with utilizing the critical vocabulary. These are just some other examples. I was going to have you write examples, but I got to watch our time. So sentence stems is another way to infuse right into what we're already doing. We're asking comprehension questions. We can give them a sentence stem to answer it so that they are using the critical vocabulary terms and have complete sentences when they add to it. All right, and this is just the procedure. I wanted to give you extra prompts. All right, next one is from a project that we did in summer schools. So we had students for 6 weeks and we wanted to work with students, particularly students who were going from first to second or second to third grade on sentence patterns. And so I gave you everything that we did in that project because it significantly improved the quality of student sentences. So I've written it all out for you. So we started by introducing and following step up to writing. We introduced who, action, what sentences. And we pointed out the who, for our example, is my friends, the action is watched, and what is a movie. And so the students had that, and then they took out a piece of paper and they folded it, made 3 columns, and they had who, action, what. And then they copied the who, my friends, the action, watched. And on the next line, they had to add a new what. So they had my friends watched, and they had to add to it. And they had to then copy it again. My friends watched zoo animals. My friend watched a bird. My friends watched television. My friends watched. So they used the sentence stem and they had to complete it. Of course, teachers moving around the room as they're working and quietly and privately giving specific praise or specific informative feedback to the students. So this would be an example of what the students would produce. Who, action, what, the example that we provided. And then they had to copy my friends watched and then changed to animals. Watched a small dog, watched a video, watched television. Same pattern. And after they've written them, they had to reread their sentences and whisper read out loud, better to hear your errors, to be certain their sentences made sense. And then they had to check the punctuation, the capitalization, and periods if it was a statement. Then they read them to a partner, and they picked out their very best sentence, and they read a sentence to the class. Well, the next day, we did not move off the pattern. So these are examples that we used, and you can pick your own. So the next day in our class, we had Max created. Max was a kid in the class. Max created what? And they had to do many. Max created a picture. Max created a dollhouse. Max created a birdhouse. Max created a good meal. Max created. And then the next day they came in and we did the same thing. They had to write down their sentences. They had to go back and reread their sentences, be certain they have the punctuation, be sure they made sense, read some to their partner, pick out their best one, share with the class. So we had a routine. But they created with their same pattern. Well, then we introduced other patterns using the same teaching method. And the small goldfish swam across the fishbowl, across the river. The small goldfish swam across the toilet before we flushed it. Okay. And so same pattern, no, a who and an action, and they added this case, the where. And then we did when, what, action, where. Now, again, these are taught on multiple days. So they had to, in this case, add when and where. Can you see how we're building up through basically sentence expansion? And then we went to a what, action, how, where. A when, who, action, what. Same pattern. We introduced one, they folded their paper, they wrote down when, who, action, what. They wrote in the example, and then they had to just keep, we learned, and then the next day the girls played. When did they play? What did they play? We wrote and we wrote and we wrote some more. But now you have a little piece that you could say, wow, I have an intervention group next year of fourth graders. We're doing this. We're going to spend part of our time, maybe 10 minutes, on sentence writing. You got the sort of a little curriculum. All right, now we are going to look at sentence activities from my favorite book that should be, if you're a teacher in fourth, fifth, or fifth grade in general ed, or you teach language arts in the middle school, or you teach intervention to students in the area of writing. This needs to be in your hands. The Writing Revolution, Judith Hochman has written numerous books about writing. And this one she paired up with Natalie Wexler. It's a very fine guide. And it uses very explicit instruction. I do it, we do it, you do it. But I particularly like the chapter on sentences. Now I'm going to have to watch our time and be selective here. But the activities are meant to be ones that you could infuse into other content areas. So certain sentences types you could do connected with your core reading program in general ed, which doesn't do enough writing. You could connect it to those informational texts that we were reading on Fridays and have the students use one of these activities to respond to it in sentences. You could use them in science and social studies, as you will see. So be thinking as we look at these, what are your favorites? Now, I'm going to have to assume that maybe if you think they're really good, that you get a copy of Writing Revolution and read more about them, because our time is short, our information is great. So they're designed that I am writing a sentence in response to something I've read. I'm writing a sentence in response to something I've read, so I have some content, because you got to have content to write. So I'm going to draw from what I've read. So it reinforces content knowledge. And because I'm writing in response to what I read, it's going to also improve comprehension. And of course, writing skills. So all of the activities were meant to increase all three. I'm writing in response to what I read in content. Thus, I'm using comprehension skills to read it, and I am writing in response. So different activities. So I even gave you the page numbers, so when you get your book, you can say, ooh, I'm going to turn to page 27 and learn more about it. So one thing they teach is the difference between a sentence and a fragment. So that I can go to a student when I'm monitoring and say, that's a fragment. And they'll say, oh, you're right. It's not a complete thought. It's not a sentence. So it's a good thing to teach. So one day I was teaching it and the students had I read to them a read aloud. And I want to be clear. Earlier I said, when the question was asked, should I read them in the later grades instead of having them read it, books, I suggested that you had them read. But in the younger grades, read alouds are absolutely essential, because if I'm just teaching kindergarten kids to read and they have a sentence like, the cat is on the mat, and it's a beautiful one for decoding, but it's not deep comprehension. What can you ask? Who's on the mat? Where's the cat? That's it. That wraps it up. But if I read something to them, which we should be reading, doing read alouds in kindergarten, first and second grade at materials significantly higher than their readability. And about half of all those books we read to them should be informational text, so they're getting knowledge they can use later for comprehension. So we had read Baby Animals of the Desert. And I want to teach them what is a fragment versus a sentence and practice that. So afterwards, we read Are Very Dry. And I asked them, what is very dry? And they said, from the book we just read, the deserts. And I said, so a complete sentence has to be a complete thought, and are very dry, we don't know what are very dry. So then we changed it into a complete sentence. Deserts are very dry. Deserts can get very hot. So what gets very hot? Deserts. So what happens to the deserts? They get very hot. This is a complete sentence. It is a complete thought. So we have to make it into a complete sentence by adding a capital and a period. So by asking these questions of them, we are determining if it is a fragment or if it's a complete sentence. So I just continued here with what I taught that day. Young baby kit foxes. What about young baby kit foxes? What do they do? So we have to add something. So we corrected the sentence. Young baby kit foxes, according to the story, stay in the den. And we mark it with the capital and a period. Kit foxes have big ears. What do kit foxes have? Big ears. What animal has big ears? Kit foxes. Is this a complete sentence? Yes. What do we need to add? A capital and a period. The father groundhouse can. What can the father groundhouse do? Does it tell us? No. Is it a complete sentence? No. See, teaching this, what is a fragment? What is a complete sentence? Because it's so useful. Now I can convey it to kids. That's a fragment. Okay. So another thing we might teach, another activity, is types of sentences. And so a statement, a command, a question, and an exclamation. So I taught students what these were, and I used one day, I had read a narrative with them, The Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. And so I used examples of a narrative sentence. That was a statement. A narrative one that was a command. A narrative one that was a question. A narrative one that was an exclamation. And so I taught them what each of these meant, utilizing on subsequent days what we had read. But then I went to having them identify it. Is it a statement, a command, a question, or an exclamation? So they had to figure out what it was. And we did that for many, many days. But notice once again, it is reinforcing what they had read, because they had just read about the International Space Station. And then what I liked that this got to was this. So this was a 4th grade class, and they had read in Wonders, The Moon Over the Star. And they were to write a statement, a question, a command, and an exclamation. But I gave them a word to help them out. So this is one student's answers. So they had to write a statement using the word spaceship. The spaceship carrying 3 astronauts would land on the moon. A question using the word astronauts. Who were the astronauts? A command using the word flight. Take care on the flight. An exclamation that shows and includes the word excited. Everyone was excited. And then for the rest of the year, once a week, they continued to write statement, questions, command, explanations, but the teacher only preparation was refer to the passage we've read and use these words in the statements. Isn't that cool? So I even put this in there. All you have to do is delete the words and you can use it. So we have 2 kinds of sentences, activities, read more about them, that you could consider using. This is one of my favorites though, the unscrambling scrambled sentences. And you find it in the Reading Revolution, page 31. So pre-COVID, I used to spend about a month, if not a little more, in Australia, teaching in the state of Queensland. And so often I did demonstration lessons, and I got an email from the teachers in, I believe it was 2nd grade, but they said, we've been reading different versions of the 3 Little Pigs, and we would like you to have a lesson that involves reading a new one story or having it read to them about the 3 Little Pigs, and then writing. So I thought, okay. So if you've ever come to Portland, Oregon, you know that one of the big sites that you must stop at is Powell's Bookstore, because we have the largest independent bookstore in the United States. And so I went right down to Powell's, and I went to the children's literature department. And I said, I'm looking for different renditions of the 3 Little Pigs. I really like the original one. And she said, well, come this way, and took me right over to this 3 or 4, well, it was probably a whole row of Little Pig books. And I said, which one's the original? She said, this one. Well, so I sat down and read it, and oh my God, it's so violent. I mean, they don't just have the wolf falling into the pot, but no, they take out his body and cut it into little pieces and invite all the pigs in the neighborhood in to feast on the wolf. I said, oh God, I can't do that in 2nd graders. But then I said, do you have a nicer version? She said, oh yes, this one. Fell into the pot. It was cold water. And the wolf jumped out and ran off and never returned. Okay, we can read that one. But then what am I going to do in writing? So I decided to utilize the unscramble the sentence version right from the textbook. And so you take a sentence, and again, it's based on something they've read, and you reorder it. And as a prompt, I gave the first word. Now, don't just leap into practicing this. Teach it. Remember, many of you, when you wrote down your best practices from yesterday, wrote down, teach, then ask. So I said, here are words from a sentence, and read them with me, everybody. First, the built a pig house straw. And I've got to make a sentence from those. And I'm going to start with the. So watch as I do the first one. The. Now, the is going to be followed by a noun. And it could be pig, it could be house, it could be straw. But I think they're going to talk about the main character, which is a pig, the pig. And then they might give an action word, a verb, the pig built. And built a house. The pig built a house. But I've got some leftover words. One of them is what? First. The first pig built a house. Then I have the word straw. It was a straw house. The first pig built a straw house. Ta-da! Check it out. The first pig built a straw house. Now notice how much we are teaching there. The structure of English. And that we often have the first part of it is the subject, an action word, and then it might include more words that tell about that action. And it really leads to comprehension. The first pig built a straw house. Well, I then modeled it on the wolf blew the straw house down. And then we did it together. The pig sticks a house of second built. And starting with the, whisper to your partner what we might try next. I called on a student and the student said pig. The pig. What action did the pig take? Whisper to your partner. Student said built. The pig built. What did the pig built? Say it to your partner. And they said house. And then we have to add the other words. The pig built a house. The pig built a house of sticks. We have one word left. The second pig built, and so forth. Okay, we had a lovely time. Did the kids love this activity? Absolutely. Did it teach them a great deal? Absolutely. The structure of sentences, the grammar, the punctuation, but also it taught them sentence expansion, because the pig built could be a sentence, but the pig built a house is more of a sentence, and the pig built house of sticks is another expansion, and it was the second pig who did it, more expansion. All right. Okay, I had a lot of fun with this. And we already talked about basic sentence steps, so which I put in here twice. So you get to look at it twice. And developing questions. This is one our kindergarten teachers could do too, because they found it was most useful to teach them how to develop questions based on the read alouds. So they would show them the cover and teach the students how to come up with a question. So you're looking at this, say to yourself, two questions that come to mind as you look at this. I don't believe in dragons. Why did he believe in dragons? Why did he need to believe in dragons? So the students would come up with questions, and the day I taught it, this was their questions. Who doesn't believe in dragons? Why doesn't the boy believe in dragons? Is the dragon real? But you see, you can shift this right into every time you read in the primary grades a book looking at the cover. You can have the students generate questions that they then dictate, and you could write them down. So you could teach it using a stimulus that you already have. Isn't this exciting? These are very good activities. And here is basically one of my favorites. And it'll be your favorite too. Because, but, so. Of all the ones that we have taught over time from the work of Judith Hochman, this is people's favorite. And because, but, so is first taught. And first of all, let me just go back here and look at this one with you. So here you have a sentence stem. The teacher was happy, and you have a conjunction because. And then the students have to complete it, telling why was the teacher happy. The teacher was happy, but the children wanted class to end. So you're going in one direction, happy, 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 but. And the teacher was happy, so. And this shows what happens. The teacher was happy, so the teacher praised the children. So because is why, but is a change in direction, and so is the results or what happened. So this one, when I've taught it, check out page 40 in the book. I've done it with oral sentences first and modeled it. The teacher was happy because the children listened carefully. The teacher was happy, but the children wanted class to end. The teacher was happy, so the teacher praised the children. But then did it with another oral sentence. The dog barked because a stranger was in the yard. The dog barked, but the dog could not get outside. The dog barked, so the stranger quickly left the yard. Again, emphasizing because is why, but is a change in direction, and so is a result. And then we did oral ones that they had to come up with answers. And I recorded some of their answers. See if we can find those. Many people came to Megan's birthday party. This is one student, because she had friends from school, church, and soccer. Many people came to Megan's birthday party, but her grandparents were out of the country and could not return for the party. Many people came to Megan's, and it was in this one I was teaching in Australia also, and there you'd be a Megan, not a Megan, birthday party. So her parents had to order 2 birthday cakes. So it was taught as an oral exercise before we did writing. And then on subsequent days, we began to do writing. And I remember this one so well because of the child's answers. The family grew many vegetables because they were vegans. The family grew many vegetables, but most of them were sold at the market. The family grew vegetables, so they grew to be very, very healthy. And so the kid was a vegan and liked this sentence starter very much. But this is how we taught it, but then we used it. So in fact, in one district that I'm working with, every Tuesday and Thursday in the 4th and 5th and 6th grade, they use because, but, so in response to what they've read. So this was in 4th grade Wonders. They read this story. And so when they came in the next day, this was what was on the screen, and they had to copy and complete each of these. So here's one student's answers. The aurora borealis is an amazing light show because electric charges cause colorful bands of light. And so they had each of these sentences. And forgive me, that's my home phone, and it's just going to have to ring for a moment. So we had review of the content, comprehension, and writing. But this is one that I did on that unit on Kenya. They came in and they had these stems, and Kenya is an independent nation today because they had to use their knowledge to complete it. So we have content, comprehension, and writing. Kenya is an independent nation today, but it had to complete it. So again, content, comprehension, as well as writing. Kenya is an independent nation today, so they completed content, comprehension, and writing. Now, one day, I had middle school teachers, and a teacher really liked this very much and sent me some additional examples for her own classes because she said, I'm going to do it once a week. So we have content, comprehension, and writing. And this is just a little checklist that is one of your slides. You could use it. So they had to ask complete sentence. Does it make sense? Is there a capital? Is there a period? Is the spelling correct? Is the handwriting neat or at least legible? And let's see our time of positives. I love positives. So this is one that I definitely teach now to middle school kids in writing because it gives them great topic sentences. Now, a positive simply is where after we have a noun, we add a parallel noun or explanation. New York City, the largest city in the United States, comma, is a major tourist attraction. And so can you see how learning about positives would be so powerful in your writing, particularly of topic sentences? Wowie. So I just included here another example. This was from an 8th grade class where we had read about the Panama Canal. They came in the next day. The Panama Canal, needed a positive, connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. The Panama Canal crosses Panama, comma. So here's one student's answers. Panama Canal, a human-made waterway, comma, connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. The Panama Canal crosses a narrow country connecting Central America and South America. Wow, don't you love positives? Think about checking out teaching positives. Okay, now I'm going to skip a little bit. You can read more because I want to get to the last 2 exercises. So we looked at these. You can read more about them, but picking one, what we've done in most school settings is, particularly working in general ed, we'll pick one of these and we'll do it for 2 to 4 weeks. And then we'll add another one and we'll do it for 2 to 4 weeks. And then we'll mix them up. And then we add to it. And you cannot imagine how improved their paragraph writing is when they write better sentences. And the kids like it a lot. Okay, so in the work that I did with Mary Gleason and Steve Isaacson in Reward Sentence Refinement, we looked at sentence expansion and sentence combining research. So sentence expansion is where you improve your sentences by adding questions that answer things such as, when did it happen? Where did it happen? Why did it happen? How did it happen? And so they're taught to expand their sentences. And there is the writing practice guide. Oh, I want you to get those practice guides on elementary writing. Talks about sentence expansion. So this is how we set up our exercises. We had a start sentence like the children raced and gave them words that they had to write down details to add to it. So this child's had when, one spring day, where, down the road. So the children one spring day ran down the road. Why? To celebrate the last day of the school year. Actually, it's the teachers who are racing. And then put it in a sentence. One spring day, the children ran down the road to celebrate the last day of the school year. So you give them the sentence starter, You give them questions, and at first you would not start with all three. You might just have them add a when. And then you might have them add a when and where. And then you might have them add a when, where, and a why. But remember, this could be utilized in content area classes. We've read about pyramids. And so the sentence start with pyramids were built. And when, and you have to add a detail, where, add a detail, why, add a detail, and then put it all together. In ancient times, pyramids were built in Egypt to protect the body of the deceased pharaoh. Wow. Wouldn't you be pleased with this level of sentence? Now, this just shows that this is very useful, like in social studies. This was a middle school social studies after we read a chapter about Andrew Jackson. And so the next day they came in, Andrew Jackson and his American forces won. What did they win? The Battle of New Orleans. When did they win it? January 8th, 1815. Why? They wanted to keep the British from seizing New Orleans and the Louisiana Purchase. Oh my gosh, put that into a sentence. Now, all of our secondary teachers who are with us today are thinking, on January 8th, 1815, Andrew Jackson and his American forces won the Battle of New Orleans, stopping the British from invading and seizing New Orleans and the vast Louisiana Purchase. You're thinking, oh my God. But we modeled this, we practice it, and the students are learning how to add details. Very much like in that pattern work that we did earlier, add details. Steve Graham is my favorite writer in the area of writing. And they did one study where they just gave kids one directive, and it made a huge difference. Add more details, 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 add more details. That's what we're doing with sentence expansion. Now, this is a science teacher who said we could do this in science, and she sent me one of the examples that she used. So I had to look up cellular respiration to be certain I could have done this. And the last one is sentence combining. It actually has the best research available on it, improving students' writing. But I will tell you, unless you have a curriculum that like one that we wrote called Sentence Refinement, it takes a lot more preparation. All the ones up to now I have chosen because they take preparation, but minimal. This one takes more. But it's where you give them sentences that they have to combine. The boy was riding his bike. The boy was careless. The boy ran into a tree. The boy was careless while riding his bike, so he ran into a tree. But you have more preparation. But it is a definite activity that students love. It requires thinking. I even have books for sentence combining for college students to improve their writing for their English classes that I will sometimes take out and do a few examples. So this one is from Reward Sentence Refinement. So we give them a start sentence. Linda grabbed a seat. A add sentence, Bobby grabbed a seat, and they have to underline what's added. Bobby, the seats were adjoining. So they add, underline adjoining. The seats were on the bus, something to add on the bus. The bus was crowded, and add that. So Linda grabbed a seat. Linda and Bobby grabbed a seat. The seats were adjoining. Linda and Bobby grabbed adjoining seats. The seats were on the bus. Linda and Bobby grabbed adjoining seats on the bus. Bus was crowded. Linda and Bobby grabbed adjoining seats on the crowded bus. And then they would write the create sentence out. So these are examples from it. What's the big idea here? Even in an hour, pick some ways that you could have students writing sentence often. Maybe you are doing dictation already at a sentence dictation. Maybe you're already asking comprehension questions. Give them a sentence stem and have them complete it. You have summer school, they're starting the year, and you want to teach patterns. Use the little curriculum, the mini curriculum I gave you on pattern writing over the course of many months. You'll see great improvement. Get a copy of the Writing Revolution, and use some of the activities that we just talked about. But have them write a sentence, 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 write a sentence. Can you believe it's 10 o'clock, which means it's 12 o'clock. And I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, because I bet, Michelle, you have some things that we need to know as we wrap up our time.
I do, Anita. Thank you so much for an incredible day. And I know there are still some questions kind of hovering in the inbox that I want to get to, but I'm going to do a quick promotion for the South Dakota Council for Exceptional Children. I put some information in the chat box. I also put a press release in the chat box that I encourage you to look at. It's announcing our first South Dakota Yes I Can award winners. These are students in the state of South Dakota who we are recognizing for their exceptional achievements. So I encourage you to take a look at that. I encourage you to consider joining our organization so we can continue to put on events like this. If you have found this valuable, please consider joining us. And with that, I am going to share my screen and we are going to draw.
Should I add to CEC? So I have been a member of CEC for 50 years. And there's so many excellent resources. And for example, the special ed, one that is a newsletter that comes out often, is terrific. And it is done by John Lloyd. It's definitely something to read. So, and children with disabilities need to be supported. And it is the organization that has consistently worked on things like very first introduction of students in the 1980s, guaranteeing their right to attend school. So if you believe that all children should be educated, and particularly if you're a special educator, join CEC. Now, did you get a winner?
I haven't done it yet, so hang on. I'm gonna share my screen. Can everyone see it?
We love it.
All right, here we go. I hope you win. Oh, that's not right. Okay, that's not happening.
No, all those random names that stopped on yours.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Okay,
we'll try that
try
once
it
again.
again.
One more time. All right, Leanne, are you here?
So she has to open her voice and yell out, yes.
Yep, you got to tell us she should. While we are waiting for Leanne to respond, I am going to quickly ask you this one question about sentence patterns.
So people, we're going to stay on and answer all your questions. I presume that you could also choose to leave because we have after our time, and well, thank you for being with us, but you can stick around and put in questions. So,
all right,
patterns.
So here is the question, asking about sentence patterns.
Yes.
When you're doing sentence patterns, are you worrying about spelling? Are you correcting them on the spelling or just focusing on the making of the sentence? So this is in reference to her special ed students who struggle with spelling.
Right. So first of all, let's say that spelling is always a challenge, and most kids will ask you, how do you spell the word? And I will tell you, if they ask, don't spell it out loud, write it down so that they always have the visual to copy. And what I always do is this. I will carry around a piece of paper. Most of you have dot cameras. And so when students are writing and they ask how to spell a word, I'll write it down. and write it down. And then I put it up on the dock camera, and number them. And so that child wants pumpkin because it's about Halloween. That was the example I gave. And one student asked to write pumpkin. I wrote it down, put it up on the dock camera. And the next child said, how do you spell pumpkin? It's number 3. Look at that. Next kid says, how do you spell pumpkin? Look at number 4. So you can be kind of strategic about it. But also, there's only words that you have taught the spelling of that are no excuse words. And those you would expect them to write. Other words you haven't taught, or you haven't taught the sounds in it, then they can ask for the spelling of the word, but you also accept to them invented spelling. And I don't really like the term invented spelling because it's like you invent spelling. No, you don't invent spelling, but it's temporary spelling. So you haven't learned how to spell it yet, or all the sounds in it, so it's temporary. When you learn how to spell it, you will spell it correctly. You see the difference between those two terms? Invented is the wrong message. Temporary is a much better message.
Love it. The other question, some of my students have a hard time pulling ideas out of their head and putting it on paper. I've had them dictate their own sentences to me, and I do a model for them to copy. Is this a good practice, or should I stop doing this?
Well, okay, let's look at what you first said. They have difficulty sometimes they have difficulty because they don't have content. That's why the writing is in response to what you read to them or what they have read, so that they already do have some content. Now, having them, so one part of that question would be solved by certain that they have content, okay? So if you say to students, I try to avoid doing writing where it's from their personal experience, because I say something like, write about what you did over the weekend. Well, I have one student there whose parents first took them on a drive to a nearby town so that they could shop. They went to a movie while they were there. They were joined by their grandparents the next morning for breakfast. And another child, his parents work on the weekends and they stayed home and watched television, the end. So I don't want to put them in that situation. That's why I have the content based on something we have read, something we've taught, so everybody has a possibility. Now, having them dictate it, and then you write it down and they read it back, then make it something that they go to the next step. You teach them how to do dictation on a computer where they say it and it's done, and they reread it to be certain it makes sense. So it has to be a step forward. It's not what you're going to do forever. And then you go to the next step. They think of the thought, they say it, and then they write it. So have a progression to a gradual release of responsibility.
Excellent. Wonderful. I'm just kind of monitoring. I don't see any more. This is last call because our webinar is going to shut down in just a minute or two.
Wasn't it a delightful time we've had?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much.
Good mornings.
Well, I know it was very early mornings for you, and I really, really appreciate it.
Appreciate